So my piece is called In a Relationship with Coffee, and it's an immersive experience where you're drinking, I make a cup of coffee for you, you drink the coffee, and using an app on your phone and some headphones, your experience of drinking that coffee is augmented. So the thing that I've done with the funding from Future Ventures Foundation, which I couldn't have done otherwise, is experiment. And there wasn't a pressure for a timeline, and so it wasn't going for like a festival or it needed to be finished within a year or anything like that. So it allowed me to take my time to experiment, and the main thing, because it was a funding for a prototype, and the main thing we did is something called a technical sprint, which I'd never ever done before, but people had talked about that. And that's where you basically get together with the team, but in this case it was myself as an artist and an artist app developer called Alex Peckham. And we just got in a room for a week, and we started with, I had an idea of what I wanted to make the piece about, and then we just spent the week making a prototype from beginning to end. Slightly before that, I went on a journey of exploring my idea, which was actually to augment food to start with. So I started off with maybe an idea of eating some chocolate. And I went on a journey, and through the funding I was able to speak to people who were like working in the area of technology and art, or art out in the public sphere. And through those conversations, I went on a journey with the idea and ended up actually that coffee is very interesting as a foodstuff, and why don't I try and do the piece about coffee? So at the beginning of the technical sprint, we looked at what the idea was, augment drinking a cup of coffee, and kind of what we knew, so what tools we had, what we knew, and kind of like I wanted to make a political piece about coffee. I wanted to use augmented reality, and we started off looking at what the augmented reality tools that we could use that were like affordable within the funding. So that was kind of the beginning part of it. And I pretty much wrote the piece that's there. I got very inspired on the Monday, went home, wrote the piece, came in, kind of edited it on the Tuesday, and then we went with using the technology, and we ended up doing a kind of a private test, but in a public place on the Thursday, and the kind of recollection on the Friday. So that's and then also I guess being part of Future Ventures Foundation and coming to this celebration has allowed me to have done some refining of the prototype, which is still a prototype, and then I've been able to test it with people here. So I guess the feeling that it doesn't have to be finished right now, and allowing me to still keep on working on it as a piece of art, which is like quite a rare thing, because often you get a commission, there's a date that you have to finish it by, and there's also an agenda of what whoever's commissioning you want, by when, and maybe even how they want to do it. And with this, there was no agenda at all, except augment, I could have even changed my idea and decided after the research maybe not to do augmented reality. We could have started the technical sprint, thought there's no tools there that really work, and we could have changed our idea. But I'm interested in the area of public sphere and augmented reality, so it was something that I wanted to test out. So there's quite a lot of art about food. There's particularly a lot of performance art about food, and what I was interested in is that moment when you love a food stuff like, say, chocolate or even a beautiful dinner, or coffee, that moment when you go into a coffee shop, and even if you're just having a cup of coffee to wake you up, coffee is, the actual cup of coffee, say if you go to Costa Coffee, is actually quite expensive, but the money doesn't actually go to the people who are out in the fields picking the coffee. And what I wanted to do with augmented reality is bring that, try to immerse people and get them to think emotionally about, while they're drinking their coffee, about that somebody in a field in India or Brazil has picked that coffee, and what is the relationship between that and your beautiful coffee moment that you're enjoying. I've had an interesting range of feedback this weekend. So this, in a way, are supportive artists and other people involved with, the people on the board with Future Ventures. So in a way, it's like very people supportive of your work. So it's a good place to test, but also it's a place where I might not necessarily get the most critical feedback. But I actually have had some critical feedback. One person said the coffee was awful, but didn't tell me why or give me any more feedback. Definitely about 3 people have not wanted to do the coffee experience. They've only wanted a cup of coffee. And very importantly, that is actually part of it, because in saying that they don't want the coffee experience, they only want the cup of coffee, I actually, in the piece, say that you are not just buying coffee, you're buying an experience and you're connecting with the people who've picked that coffee for you. So actually, I've been surprised by some of the feedback, because I actually thought everybody was going to be pretty much on side, because we're like in a supported community. So that's been interesting. And then I've had people who've said it's quite meditative, and they've actually enjoyed the experience of drinking the coffee. And because I'm a person who because my performance is me, I'm not like an actor, so I'm not acting anything. They felt like it was me talking to them while they were having their cup of coffee, and and it's quite poetic and gentle, quite hard hitting politically, but quite poetic. And there's a section at the end that invites you to take action, and I've had some feedback that people like that, because otherwise, you would take people on a journey and say your coffee's calm and people have picked that coffee for you, and then at the end, well, what do people do, feel, act? And I think it was Dan, pretty sure it was Dan, talked about head, heart and hand. And there've been a lot of, we've been exploring a lot of art over the weekend, and some of it is head and some of it is heart and some of it is hand. So I think my feedback has I've probably had all of those types of feedback. I could compare this experience to, I had some R&D money in 2016 from the Arts Council to explore augmented reality in a live performance. And it was a lot more money than this, so I wasn't able to do more and, go on a longer journey. And I guess the difference is that this was kind of like half the amount of money, but there wasn't the same expectations. So even though I had R&D money and there was no outcome on it, I did actually do my initial piece, which was called Peas on Earth, Emergency Festival. But that was to test it out. I mean, there isn't a requirement necessarily with R&D that you have to have an outcome or know what the outcome is. But I do think that it is, I want my work to be out there in the world, so in order for it to be out in the world, it needs to be tested so that I can explore what it is saying to people and get feedback and kind of go on a journey with it. I think probably the difference is, one of the differences is you get all the money up front, so you're not thinking, well, usually what happens with Arts Council funding is you pay yourself last. So that didn't happen. And I guess the openness of the fund to fund me to do a technical sprint, because the thing about using technology in your work is that, like augmented reality, it's expensive. And I have had unsuccessful funding applications to the Arts Council, probably because the technology costs in it were a lot for what they see as value, because they do an equation and look at public engagement, how many people for that amount of money. So I didn't have to have the equation done on the piece that I was doing. And and there was like an openness to experiment and try something. I also had 2 different mentors for this project. One who was more on the technical side and one who was more who works in the area of performance. So that was good to, you know, be able to get feedback in different ways. And I think with a lot of funding, they either micromanage you or kind of leave you alone. And it's really up to you to decide what kind of support you want. So what's next for the project is I would still like to do some more testing, because I think that I've watched people experiencing the piece and using the app, and it's still not quite right. But there are financial limitations to being able to like do it from scratch. And we did actually talk about that at the beginning and how much that would cost. I talked about that with Alex. So a bit more testing. I would like to find a Costa Coffee or a Starbucks with a manager who likes art. I don't know if that's possible. Because I could go to an independent, I know people who work in independent coffee shops, and that might be also a place to go. So I would like to take it out and do some more testing and get some more feedback. So there's a section at the end where there are pledges, so I can see if people interact with that. I can also see if people, I can get the data to see at what times and how many people, not people, but how many different devices interact. So I can get some data. So I haven't really got enough data to say, because I can see if people start the experience and don't continue. So yes, I get more data really. And what my ultimate ideal is to be able to polish off this prototype. So I bought some 3D models from the internet for the sections, and none of them worked with the particular augmented reality platform that we're using. So I'm not happy with those, or would like to refine those, but that involves getting some more money for some technical time to do that. The piece is going to be as part of a food justice forum, as part of Leeds International Festival in May. And probably this iteration, possibly if I could get some models to it, kind of refine it a little bit. But that'll be a test, because that will go more with food justice people. I mean, it's a food justice and digital arts forum, but it's going to be probably more food justice people and academics. So that's a very different type of test. And then I think once I get all the data from those different tests, I'll just kind of have a think about where it might like to go. I mean, ultimately I wanted it to be a self-guided experience that was in the coffee shop on a postcard. It says you can win a free cup of coffee, so people might pick it up and decide to do it. That's the kind of incentive to get people to try it. And then, then I'll have quite a lot of data, and then I'll be able to kind of reflect on whether it's effective as a piece of activist art. And if I might want it, there was an initial idea at my interview for it to be Creative Commons, so to basically have the postcard as a PDF that people could just download and take it to your local coffee shop. So that's the kind of ultimate aim. I think that so it's a political art fund, and I think being able to express exactly what you want to say along the spectrum or the even spiral of what is activist art activism. I mean, quite a few people were saying yesterday it is the same thing, and they don't separate that. But funders do. And, you know, there are social justice funds and there are arts funds, and there are these kind of requirements for public engagement. So to actually be able to create the piece of art that you want to create with all its political intentions and not be censored in any way in doing that is you know, a brilliant thing and a very rare thing.